Do you have a doll who needs some clothes? Do you have no idea who she is, so you don't even know what doll to look up on the internet so you can find a pattern to use for her? Well, maybe you should just make a pattern from scratch. You might want to start by learning how to make a sloper. Hi, this is Elizabeth Ruffing from ruffings.com and thelittlehouseofcats.com. Welcome to our channel. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps our channel. I'm going to be making a fitting sloper today for a vintage hard plastic doll. It's a very fitted pattern that gives you the exact measurements of your body or your doll, and you use it to make patterns and to fit other patterns. It doesn't have a lot of ease in it, which means there's no additional fullness in it for movement or design details. It's just very basic. You'll add ease later when you make a pattern from it. But right now we just want a two-dimensional representation of our doll body so that we have all the measurements on paper, and then we have shapes that we can use to build patterns and to adjust other patterns. I'm going to use a method that I improvised. It's pretty safe for vinyl and cloth dolls. I used it here on a vintage hard plastic doll. The doll is painted over plastic, so a safer method to use would be one where you were either using paper or muslin to make the sloper, or you could wrap her body in plastic wrap first and then secure it with Scotch tape or another kind of tape, and then put either tape or what I'm going to use, which is embroidery stabilizer. It is like a sticky backed interfacing. I'm going to put it directly on the doll. Now it does dissolve in water, so if you had an emergency and you had to get it off, you could, but I would not use it on a painted doll like a composition doll, because you can't put water on a composition doll. So I would use a different method for that. But for this doll, it worked out okay. I would not use a brand new mint doll that is precious to you. This doll needs some work. She has some paint missing. I'm going to retouch her paint anyway. And a general rule of thumb, when you make a sloper, it's always better to use a doll that has a little bit of wear that is not precious to you, because things happen when you make a sloper. Sometimes you'll get a mark on it from your pencil or your pen. I'm going to use a pencil, and I'm going to use the embroidery stabilizer. I'm going to put it directly onto the doll, and I will be able to draw the exact lines that I want along her seams and her plastic. I'll be following her shoulder seam, her side seam, her joint where her arm meets her body, and her neckline. And I will measure her waistline. Now this is just a bodice and sleeve, so it just goes to her waistline. When I make a pattern from this, I will add some ease, which is an extra amount of room so that I can accommodate a gathered skirt underneath this. Right now it fits right against her body, and that's giving me information that I need to make a pattern. And I don't have to take a measurement every time. I can use the shape and compare it to my patterns, or I can make my own pattern from those shapes. And I will end up with the front of the bodice as a pattern piece. I will end up with a back bodice, which will be half and half. It'll have a seam down the back, and you make a little bit of an overlap so that you can put your fasteners there. And I will end up with a sleeve piece, and it's going to be a fitted sleeve, so it has a slight bit of ease around the shoulder cap just to fit over the shoulder, because the shoulder is rounded. These little shorts were made by my grandmother when I was little. We used to make doll clothes together, and it's a fond memory of mine. This is dotted Swiss, and she made a little blouse and little shorts that went with it, and I just put them on for modesty's sake here. We didn't want our doll to be embarrassed. I would like to do some sewing videos showing basics of sewing. I am going to make this muslin, and I'm just going to use a needle and thread. I'm not going to use a sewing machine. I'm going to use just a running stitch. It makes it easy to take apart again. It's not as frustrating as trying to learn how to sew on a sewing machine, because you don't have to worry about running over the wrong part of it or taking it apart. I'm going to draw the seam lines directly onto the fabric. I am not adding the seam allowances to my sloper pattern right now because it's much easier to use it without them. I will add my seam allowances later when I make a pattern that I want to use. I am just going to draw the seam lines and the dart lines directly on my muslin, and this is my test garment that I made from my sloper pieces. I'm just going to use a needle and a thread to make this muslin, so you don't need a sewing machine. You will just need some stabilizer, and you will need a pencil, some paper and some tracing paper, a bit of muslin or any scrap fabric, a needle and a thread. I think that's about it other than a ruler. You'll need a ruler and a measuring tape. It doesn't take anything special. And as I said, you can use tape over plastic wrap. You don't have to buy an embroidery stabilizer if you don't want to, or if it's too expensive. And you don't need to buy a sewing machine to learn how to sew either. And you can buy some fabric at a thrift store, get an old sheet or an old pillowcase. It just doesn't matter. The point is that you're learning how to do this and that you don't get frustrated over it and give it up, because it's very rewarding after you learn how to do it, but you don't want to get discouraged. Later on, we'll be working on how to make a pattern and adjust patterns, but in this video we're just going to make a bodice and a sleeve, and we are going to make the muslin to see how it fits, and then we can make adjustments to it later. Thank you for watching. We're going to get started on this now. You'll need a doll, preferably one who still needs a little bit of work in case you get a couple marks on her that you need to clean off. You'll need some safe release tape. Artist tape is better, but this is painter's tape. Some pencils. I'll use a 2B and maybe a 5B. Some scissors. A ruler. This is a quilting ruler. A few sheets of tracing paper. Letter size cut in half is fine. Some copy paper, a few sheets. A dish towel to lay your doll on so she doesn't get scratched up. And some sticky backed embroidery stabilizer. This is Sulky brand. It's called Sticky Fabri-Solvy. It just looks like sticky backed interfacing. And I'm going to put it directly on her. If you are concerned about paint coming off or anything like that, or you have a fragile doll, you can wrap your doll in plastic wrap, just one layer, secure it with some Scotch tape, and that will protect your doll. There are lots of ways to do this. You can also put tape on top of plastic wrap and carefully cut it off later. You just have to be really careful not to nick your doll. I like this because I don't leave it on long and I just pull it off and I've got my pattern piece. All right. I have a 16-inch doll, and I'm starting with anyway, 2 pieces of the Fabri-Solvy. They're about, I don't know, 5 by 6. I'm going to start by folding one of them in half. Next I'm going to cut some notches here. This is to make space to go around the neck. Okay. I'm going to peel the paper off. The little notches are here. I am going to place this on top of my doll, and it would help if I could get her hair out of the way a little bit. This will go at the base. Alright, you can try to get the center lined up with her center as best you can. And the idea is to make this as smooth as possible. And you'll start here. And you're going to make it smooth to her shoulder. Trouble with her hair. If you can get their hair wrapped up, it's helpful. I'm just going to smooth it to the shoulder. You're not tugging, you're just going to smooth it. Helps if you can move your doll around a little bit when you want it to lay flat. Okay. All right, I'm going to cut away around her arm so that we can get around it. I'm going to trim the stabilizer away from her neck so it'll stop getting on her face. And I'm going to trim off the little excess. I'm making clips around her armhole so that I can turn the stabilizer around the curve. I'm marking the apex of the bust and the center front. The apex is the fullest part. And then I'm drawing dart lines parallel to the center front, and I'm pulling up the side of the stabilizer so that I can flatten the side. And I'm smoothing that around the side of her body. I'm clipping away the excess around her sleeve, or her armhole rather. Now there's a little tiny pucker there, but that is where her tummy starts to bulge out in her hip, and we're only going to her waistline, so I'm not concerned about that, but I am making little clips so that it will lay flat. I'm pinching the dart. Anywhere there's a curve, you're going to need a dart or a seam line. This is the armhole. It's going to be a little bit lower than the actual plastic joint. I didn't have enough stabilizer on this side to mark the plastic joint where her armhole is. I'll do that on the other side. And I'm looking at the plastic seam on her side to make the side seam. Now I'm drawing the sides of that dart where it meets her body, marking where her belly button is, marking where the waistline is. The waistline, natural waistline, is where the body comes in a little bit. It comes in the most at that point, and that will be where your skirt would be. Trimming away excess at her shoulder area, and now I'm going to draw where the shoulder seam is, and you could just look at that right on the doll. And marking this all with about a 5B pencil. Marking the neckline right up, would be a jewel neckline right up to the base of her neck, and I'll trim away any little excess I don't need. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Trim away the excess around the armhole. Make clips so that I can get it to go around the curved parts. I'm pulling up that area to make a dart. You pull it up as much as you need to smooth the side, and then that part will be the dart. I'm just folding along that, smoothing everything out, clipping below that waistline to smooth everything. We want everything to lay flat. Drawing the edges of the dart, drawing the edges of the armhole. On this side I left enough stabilizer to mark both where I want the sleeve and where her joint is at her underarm. You need the sleeve hole, the armhole rather, to be just a little bit below where that seam is, because you have to accommodate the seam allowance when you sew. So that's why I'm making it a little lower. Marking the side seam again, following the plastic joint right there. Smooth everything so it's perfectly flat. I'm drawing the neckline, and I'm doing the very same thing on this side. I'm drawing the shoulder seam. I'm just following the plastic seam in the doll body. I have to look at it because I can't see it very clearly. So I just fold that back, use my thumb a little bit to mark it. Drawing right along the edge of her arm joint, right there where the body meets the arm. That's not really a natural sleeve, a natural shoulder, but it will tell us the information we need. Drawing her waistline where her body pinches in at the waist. And we want that to be parallel to the floor. We'll check that with a ruler when we're done. Now I'm eyeballing it. I'm putting a piece of stabilizer on her back in the same way that we put it on the front. Clipping around the neck area. I'm going to pull the paper off the back. And I am going to start in the center again, smooth it up to her shoulders and neck. That's the first part that you want to deal with. Trim away any excess as you need to. Clip around her head. You don't want the clips to extend into the area where you are drawing seam lines, so you want that to be smooth. And you want everything to line up. I am clipping away where there are curves so I can get it to lie flat. Main thing is to get everything to lie flat and be smooth with no puckers. And you can lift this up and move it around as many times as you need to. And I didn't need a dart in the back because everything was flat without one. Drawing around the armhole again a little bit below the armhole. I'm drawing the center back and the side seams. I can see right where the side seam is, and those little notches on the side are just where I was thinking a shoulder blade would be. It's just for my own personal reference. It's not necessary. Trimming away the excess around the neck and drawing the shoulder seam again, drawing the neck seam right up to the base of the neck. Trim away a little excess so we don't have it stuck in her hair. Smooth everything out nicely. Clip around the armhole again so we can get it to lie flat. Trim the excess away from her shoulder. Again, this is really just a process of smoothing this to get it to lie flat and trimming away any excess. You're not going to have any clips in the area inside where you're drawing these lines. I'm drawing the armhole again and the side seam, clipping away as necessary, drawing the armhole and slightly below the armhole where I want the sleeve, shoulder seam and neck, clipping away excess again. Now this stabilizer should lift up pretty easily. Always do a test spot to make sure it's not too sticky on your doll. If it is, you could just take the paper off and tap it down on a piece of fabric first to get rid of some of the stickiness if you're concerned about lifting it off of the doll again, because it seems to stick more the longer you leave it on. I'm just trimming away excess so I can get a good look at all my lines that I drew, make sure they're all in the right place. Now this step I'm just doing to get my own mind around where the sleeve goes. It is not something you have to do. You can do this with measurements. We're going to use the measurements anyway, but I just wanted to get an idea of my own about how this curve works. It is going to be the same curve that is on the bodice where the armhole is, but I just kind of wanted an idea of its relationship to the wrist, and I just did this anyway with the stabilizer, and I just drew where the curve was. We'll be fiddling around with this with some measurements later. Also, I have this arm out more than I would be doing for a tailored sleeve. A tailored sleeve, your arm is closer to the body, and I have it so that her arms are outstretched a little more than they would be otherwise, which would be a more relaxed sleeve. A relaxed sleeve will have a sort of a more gradual curve at the top than a very tailored top, and you'll see that now. That's a gentle curve. I'm doing this so that I can map out the curve when I do the sleeve. Now I am running a piece of tape. This is painter's tape, easy release tape, running around her waist, and I am measuring so that it's all equidistant to the floor because we want that waist to be parallel to the floor. When you make a skirt, you want your skirt parallel to the floor. I'm just correcting my line, which was pretty close anyway. I eyeballed it, but I'm correcting it now to make sure it's where I want it. And don't mark your doll or you'll be annoyed later. I've got all my lines on here, and now I am going to pull the stabilizer off. Do this carefully. I said this is a painted doll, and I was a little concerned that the paint might come up. It didn't, but it was a little sticky. I would be very careful about doing this if you have paint that's not stable. And as I said before, don't do that on a composition doll because the can crack and come off. You don't want to do that. I was thinking if I had to, I can always add water to that to get it off, but I didn't have a problem. If you wrapped your doll in plastic first and then covered it, you'll draw the lines that you need on top of the tape or the stabilizer, and you'll carefully cut away at the shoulder seams and the side seams to make two pieces. You'll want to remove as much of the plastic wrap as you can before slicing it and laying it flat. You will have to slice your darts. Here I have princess seams, but you'll slice them and then lay your pieces flat on the paper and trace them. It's a little different than this process that we're doing now. So now we have our bodice front, and I pulled apart the little darts so you can see how they look, putting it on some paper because I am going to trace it onto tracing paper. Smooth this out. You don't want any clips separated from each other. Everything should just be as it would be if it were a flat piece of paper. I'm not worried about areas outside of my pencil lines. This is the bodice back now. Also putting that flat on the piece of paper. And you can see one side has where the armhole is and the other one has where I want my sleeve hole, which is a little bit lower than where her armhole is. This is the sleeve that I made. I did it twice, so I was just trying to get an idea of how that curve was going to look, and that would be a more relaxed curve than we'll be doing, so I'm going to be changing that anyway. I am going to trace my sloper pieces. That's the belly button right there. I'm putting that on there for my own reference, drawing the center front and the darts, side seams. This is the back of the bodice, drawing the armholes. Now I'm going to even this up, folding it in half, and I will average out any lines that are not matching on both sides. I did a pretty good job, so they pretty much match. Put another piece of tracing paper over this, and I'm going to trace my lines. I'm tracing the center front line first. That's the belly button again. The side seam, shoulder seam, neckline, armhole. That's where I'm going to put my sleeve. The higher one is where her joint is. This is the waistline. I'm taking an average of the center of the top of the dart and the bottom center of the dart because my darts are not exactly in the same place, finishing drawing the waistline. Now I am going to put that dart where it belongs, and I'm refolding it so that both darts are on top of each other exactly, and then I will center my line according to the center of the dart. I'm putting the center of the dart where the other center is, and then I'm drawing the sides of the dart. That gives me an average of where the dart is placed. Then I am going to fold this tracing in half and trace it onto the other side so that we have a full front bodice. And just to be careful, I'm going to put my other piece underneath there, putting it the center back fold where it was before. And that's just to double check that all my lines are in the right place. Drawing the armholes again. Putting the dart where it belongs. Belly button. Now I've got the whole thing. And it's averaged out on each side, so it's symmetrical. And that's that for the front bodice. I don't have seam allowances on this, as I said before. Doing the same to the back, folding it in half, so I can take an average of any lines that I made to make sure that they're symmetrical. As it is, they came out pretty much the same. Putting a piece of tracing paper over that, and I'm tracing my lines. This is the center back, the neckline, shoulder seam, armhole, the lower one where the sleeve goes, and then the upper one where her body joint is. And a couple of lines which I guess marked a shoulder area, or not, rather a shoulder blade area if she were to have one. Folding it in half and tracing the other side of it. And I'm taking my original and putting it under just to make sure that I get it correct. And I'll trace that side seam, waistline, neck hole, shoulder seam. We have all the lines, and now we have the symmetrical sloper piece for her back. Now I am, although I said I wasn't adding ease, I am adding just enough ease to accommodate the seam line, about 1/8 of an inch on the two side seams, on the front and the back. If I didn't do that, and I have to press the seam allowances open in the inside, that would make a little bit of bulk, and that wouldn't fit if we didn't add a little bit of space. So just a little bit of space, but I'm marking it on the pattern so that I know that that is ease. I'm using my quilting ruler to make sure I made a straight line. And I'll fold that again just to make sure it's the same on both sides. This is the other side of the front bodice side seam. I'm adding the 1/8 of an inch for ease, just to accommodate those seam lines, or seam allowances rather. I'm not drawing seam allowances on my pattern, but I will have seam allowances when I make the muslin. And I will just cut them out at random on the fabric. Not going to be super neat about it. I am taping the front bodice to the back bodice at the shoulder seam because now it's time to do the sleeve. We need a measurement of the armhole, also known as the arm's eye. And I will get an overhead on this so you can see it a little better, but I am using a measuring tape to measure that armhole. First I'm doing the front, and then I will measure the armhole on the back, and I am writing down what that measurement is. I'm using centimeters at this point because it's just a heck of a lot easier. So first I am measuring the front armhole, and it's the lower one because that's where the sleeve is going to be. Then I am measuring the back armhole, again the lower line, because that's where the sleeve is going to be. And I am about to make a sleeve cap. I check my measurements over and make sure I get them right. Because when you make a sleeve, no matter what kind of sleeve you make, your measurement has to match the bodice where the armhole is. Okay, so we're looking at that rough version I did of an arm, and that would be sort of a rough version of a sleeve. And I am measuring again. I've got my back armhole, and it has to be the same size as the back side of that sleeve. In this case, it's 6 centimeters. I'm making sure that from the center, which is that right there, to the side seam is 6 centimeters. Now I'm measuring the front armhole. Again, the lower line. And looks like I'm getting 5.5 centimeters on that. You sometimes have to measure quite a few times. 5 centimeters, 5.5 centimeters. And that back curve of the sleeve has to be 5.5 centimeters too. And it is. And I just make a mark there at 5.5 centimeters, and that will be your lower seam there on the sleeve. That's what it looks like. See the wrist, you see the top curve. And now we're going to do some measuring. First, you're going to take that center mark at the top of that curve, and you are going to draw a line going down the sleeve. I am going to check this measurement. I am measuring to the point where I want that sleeve to go, roughly where I drew that lower curve, and that is under her arm. You're kind of guesstimating this. It's sort of over the thickest part of her upper arm and across from that underarm. I'm going to measure from the top of the sleeve down that line I just drew, and I'm making a mark. That is where the underarm is, and I am going to draw a line perpendicular at that point. So you're just drawing across. One line matches up with the center of the top of the sleeve, and the other line goes across where your underarm is. That would be the top of the sleeve in the center, right there, where it hits the shoulder. I am going to draw a line down to about where the wrist is. I will correct this later because it doesn't necessarily come out right, because I had that arm extended a little bit and I'm doing a tailored sleeve, which means it's closer to the body and it will be a little bit longer. Now I am marking that point that is across from the underarm. Taking my quilting ruler, making a line perpendicular to the center line of the sleeve at the point where the underarm would be. And this is how it would look on here. And we are now going to write down those measurements for the back and the front armhole. We know the back is 6 centimeters. And this is a little weird here, but you're going to just make a straight line that matches that measurement. 6 centimeters. Now put a little dot there. And this is hard to get your head around, but don't worry about it right now. I'm going to do the same thing for the front. We measured that that curve was 5.5 centimeters. We're just going to make a straight line 5.5 centimeters, and we're going to mark a little dot on that line where the underarm is. And yes, it's a straight line for now. Make that dot. That is the distance between that little shoulder dot up there and where it meets on that underarm line. putting a piece of tracing paper over this, marking these dots. And I'm marking that center line. So I've got a dot where the wrist is, a dot where the underarm is, and a dot where the shoulder is along the center line. And on the sides, I have dots that are the distance from that shoulder seam center. Now we're going to make that line curve. I'm using my tracing. Now, oddly enough, the first time I did this, it came out right, and this time it doesn't. It doesn't have enough of a curve here, but that's okay, because if you do it wrong, we'll figure out how you fix it. Because we need that to be more curved than that. But we know that this is the correct distance as well as a curved line. And we're matching those up between those dots. So those curved lines are still the correct measurements. They're just curved. That back one is still 6 centimeters. The front one is still 5.5 centimeters. It's just curved. Now we're going to work on this curve because my second attempt did not come out quite right. And we need a little more space and a little more of a curve up there to fit over her upper arm. So we are going to have to take a measurement across the top of her arm to that joint, because that sleeve cap has to fit around there. So we are going to push that line out a little bit. Now it came out to be, I guess, 6 centimeters, and my line was a little bit inside of there. So I'm making a mark about midway between those two dots from the shoulder to the underarm, and I am going to fool with this curve until I give it a little more space at the top. We still need the same measurement though, even though it's a curved line. So we're going to keep measuring those curves to make sure that they stay the same distance. You'll use your measuring tape and you will make sure that those still coincide with those measurements. This is a little bit hard to understand and it takes a little bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it'll make sense. I am using my tape and I am curving it along this line because, as you see, it's still 6 centimeters. It's just curved. And I can let it bow out a little bit more on the top and curve in a little bit more on the bottom, and it'll still be 6 centimeters. And we'll just fiddle with that until we have it correct. Now I'm checking my wrist measurement with the doll's body the arm a little bit closer to the body, because a tailored sleeve will fit more with her arm down rather than extended. And I am measuring that. And I'll correct it here. Came out a little bit longer than my first mark. As I said before, there are all kinds of sleeves. A relaxed sleeve will have a more gradual curve to the top than tailored. Now, to get around her hand, we have to have a certain amount of width. We can't have that fit her arm perfectly because she doesn't move her fingers. So we need that sleeve to be at least as wide as the span of her fingers. So we're making that measurement and adding a little tiny bit so that we can accommodate a seam there, because we have to get over her fingers without hurting her fingers. Drawing a line where her wrist is perpendicular to that center line. To make the underarm seam, I am drawing a line parallel to the center line. And I'm starting at the point of the underarm, and I'm going down towards the line I made for the wrist. And then we will check the measurement. We want the measurement at the wrist to match the measurement we took around her fingers, plus a little bit, so we can accommodate the seam allowances once we sew our sloper together. Once I'm done, I'm going to trace this so I can make sure all my lines look good. I'm correcting my curve around the top part of the sleeve. We adjusted that sleeve cap based on the measurement that we had over the top part of her arm, the thickest part. So I'm just redrawing my center line and the line where the underarm is, and we'll compare it to that rough sleeve I made when I put my stabilizer over her arm. You can see the wrist matches, and that's where the center shoulder is. This is the underarm line, and we used those curves I made to give us a rough idea of the curved line and that measurement that we needed in curve form, and that's the front. I'm just drawing her elbow and where it would be. I don't need that right now, but I might need it later when I make a pattern from this, so I'm just recording my measurements. And I'm drawing a line perpendicular to the center line again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of ease to this sleeve cap, because we have to use a little bit of a gathering stitch when we go over a rounded thing like the top of the arm. So I am just going to slit that from the top to the bottom, and I'm just leaving it connected at the wrist so that I can spread it apart. Now I'm only spreading it apart a little bit. I'm taping it down so I can spread this. I'm spreading it apart maybe 3/16 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch, something like that. If you had a bigger doll, you would add more ease than that. And when I sew this, I am going to just put a running stitch on the top of that sleeve, just in the sleeve cap area. And I'll pull it up just a little bit. And this is what it looks like when it's separated. And I'll redraw this all over again. You can see this is where I split it, and that is going to just give me a little extra space at the top of the sleeve. Note that this curve on the top of the sleeve, the curve goes this way and then it flips this way on the ends. This is where it's closest to the underarm, and the reason it does that is because it matches the underarm seam. And you will see that I can line these up together and this little part is the same. I make a little notch when it starts to change, and it's the same with the back seam. A little hard for me to do this with one hand. Here you go. This curve goes upward and it matches here, and there's a little notch where it starts to change. And this part is a sleeve cap, and it looks most like the front and back when it's taped together. And this curve looks most like this curve. So it sort of flips in the opposite direction. And then it flips up, flips up. And now we have all three pieces. We have a sleeve, a front bodice, and a back bodice. And we'll be dividing the back bodice in half so that we can put an opening, a little overlap. And then we will make our muslin, which is next. I am taking my muslin and I am putting it over my light box with my pattern underneath it. I'm using a micron pen, and I am just going to trace the sewing lines right onto the muslin. You can use a window and just tape your pattern pieces up onto the window so you have the light coming through, and hold your muslin up to that and trace it that way too. And I am just leaving enough space in between each shape so that I can add my seam allowances. I'm going to add about 1/4 of an inch around most of the seam allowances, and on the back I'm going to leave about 1/2 inch because I need an overlap and I want to make sure I have enough fabric. Now anywhere where I think I might need some extra and maybe it won't fit perfectly, I am adding more than 1/4 inch. Probably more like 3/8 or 1/2 inch because the length of the sleeve could be wrong, or I might have to let out part of the sleeve cap if maybe it doesn't fit quite right. So you want to be kind of generous in the amount of fabric you leave around these shapes because you're putting this together so that you can see if it fits, and then you will make adjustments if you have to, and then you can let out the seams a little bit or take them in a little bit and then mark your pattern if there are any changes. Hopefully there won't be because we used a pretty accurate method of collecting our measurements. Now I'm just going to use a running stitch like I said before, and I have a thread conditioner called Thread Magic, some cotton thread, a needle, some scissors. I'm threading my needle and I'm just going to do an in and out running stitch. It's the simplest stitch there is. You poke it through in one direction, poke it back in the other, and you just go up and down. It's just like piecing a quilt together. It's quite relaxing, really. I like hand piecing, and that's all we're going to do. This is my dart. I'm folding it in half, and I'm checking as I go to make sure that I am sewing on my line. This is the most accurate way that you can get your tiny little pieces sewn together correctly. If you use a machine on something this small, you kind of goof up more often, and then you have to tear it apart, and it's kind of annoying. So I really like to do it by hand. If I'm going to make something really small, I will typically baste it together anyway, and then do the machine just for strength on the sewing. But it's a doll. The doll's not going to jump around. I'm not too worried. I'm just finger pressing this. You can certainly use a small iron. I have a small Rowenta travel iron, works great for little things like this, but finger pressing's okay. You're just kind of pressing it like it says together with your fingers. And Samantha's given me a hand here because she's very helpful. So now I am going to sew the front bodice to the back bodice pieces at the shoulder seams. I'm doing it the same way. I'm lining up my lines and I am checking as I sew, and I'm doing a running stitch right through, right along my line. And I'm only sewing the lines I made. I'm not going past them, just sewing right up to the part where it turns the other way, and I'm knotting it. Pretty straightforward assembly. Finger pressing the seams open at the shoulder seams. Keeping an eye on Samantha so she doesn't steal my thread magic. She's pretty persistent. Cats are so helpful. Now I'm going to take the neckline and I'm just going to finger press it inward so that I have a good idea of where that hits her neck. I am snipping, clipping around the seam allowance area. I'm not going into the bodice part that will show. I'm just going on the inside where the seam allowances are, and I am finger pressing that to the back. And I'm going to run a stitch around the neck. Now if you were making a finished garment, you would probably line this, but we're not really worrying about aesthetics here. We are just checking for fit. I'm just running my running stitch all the way around the neckline to keep it nice and flat for me and to keep it from stretching out. Takes a little doing, but hold all these little clipped areas down. And once we get to the center back, we can just knot it and clip it. And there's our neckline. Just giving that a little bit of a finger press. Now we're going to set in a sleeve. I have one in already, so we're going to show the next one. This is the top of our sleeve, and I'm going to make a running stitch along the sleeve cap. Now that's where that little notch we made is to where the other little notch we made is at the sleeve cap. Does not include the underarm part, just the top. And that is so that we can pull this thread in a little bit, and that's so that we can add some ease to the top of the sleeve cap, and that will make our sleeve a bit rounded at the top so it will fit over the top of the arm. So I'm making that running stitch between the two notches that we made, and then I'm going to pull it up slightly. And I'm just spreading that out. We don't want it to look gathered. We're just pulling up. You shouldn't be able to see any puckers. It's just supposed to be smooth but rounded slightly. And I'll trim that off. And now I am clipping the underarm in the seam allowance area just like we did with the neck. I'm just clipping around within the seam allowance. Now we're going to attach the sleeve, putting it right sides together with the bodice, and we are attaching it at the armhole and sewing all the way around. Same way with a running stitch. And we have that sleeve cap gathered just a slight bit just for some ease. And we're going to go all the way around the armhole of the bodice, attaching the top of the sleeve. And Sasquatch and Val are helping me by taking a nap for me. And we're lining up that center of the sleeve with the center where the shoulder is. And you can put a little pin in there before you start so that you get each of those points matched up. We have an underarm that attaches at the side seam on front and back, and we have a center mark where it attaches at the shoulder, and we have those two notches, one on the front and one on the back. And you can line each one of those up with a pin before you start. Makes it easier. Now I have the armhole all sewn, and I am finger pressing the cuff area, and I'm just going to put a running stitch on that too. This is all just to check measurements, and I'm just finger pressing where the armhole is as well. Finger pressing both of the cuff areas. Now I'm doing the underarm seam, and that is where we put the front and the back together of the bodice side seams and the underarm seam on the sleeve. And I am lining that up at the underarm, so I'll put a little pin through there to make sure I have it in the right place, and I'm just running a running stitch right through. And Sasquatch is not disturbed by this at all, and neither is Val. I'm right at the underarm right now. It's a little tricky to get around all those seams where they all kind of meet up. So I am not sewing over any of the seam allowances. I'm just sewing right on the lines that I drew where the sewing lines are. And I'm just leaving all the seam allowances free. If you were using a machine, you couldn't do that. You'd have to sew them over them, which is fine. It's easier to take it apart this way if you have to. Now I'm going down the underarm of the sleeve. This is a good time to put on a TV show or a movie. That's what I'm doing here. I'm heading towards the cuff now. And I'm trying to keep my seam lines flat and not make anything puckered. So don't pull too hard, just gently sew it together. I'm stopping right at my line. If you're sewing on a machine, you'll probably go straight past that into the seam allowance. It doesn't matter. It's just easier to take it apart without doing that. Okay, now we have an underarm seam sewn. I'm finger pressing my side seams, and I'm slipping my finger into the sleeve as much as I can to finger press open the seam allowances inside the sleeve. And I'm turning up my little cuff that I finger pressed before. And now I'm adding the running stitch to that. And I'm just going to go all the way around the cuff. This is one area that may need adjustment, so it's good to just do a running stitch on it in case you need to pull out the stitch and lower the sleeve or raise it. And I'm just knotting off my little stitching. And there I have my sleeve. And that's what it looks like on the inside, and I'm turning it right sides out. And there's my little bodice. Look at that. It's got its sleeves in it. And here she is wearing it. And that is my fitted sloper. As you see, it fits exactly. I had to lower the sleeves a little bit along the cuff because they were a little short, and that is because I measured first with her arm outstretched, and we want a tailored sleeve where it's pointing downward. But otherwise it fits really well. If I'd used an iron, I probably wouldn't have any puckers at all, but I didn't. I just finger pressed. And there's my little overlap in the back. I used some Scotch tape to close it up so we could check the fit. And it looks pretty good. She still needs a paint touch up though. And some pants, goodness. But we'll use this to make a pattern. Santana, I made a sloper for a doll. You wanna see? See? Came out pretty good. Got the shoulders right and the sleeves right. It fits pretty well. Do you want me to make one for you? What do you think? Would you wear it if I made it for you? It would look nice on you. This one would be too small, so we'd have to make another one. Here she is with her sleeve length adjusted. And I'm auditioning another wig here. That's a Dinell wig. It's a little older than the other one. Might be a little more appropriate for her era of 1949. So next we'll be doing a pattern using the sloper. I'll need to add a little bit of ease in order to fit a gathered skirt under there. Thank you for watching and sticking with this whole video. We'll work on making a pattern next, and we'll add some ease to this for some design details. Please like and subscribe